start. Look, Nicky and I don't meet before we start, so she doesn't know what I'm going to say. I'm just saying. And Nicky, if you ever want to lead with a comment, of course, you know, just speak up. But when we read the ground rules, it just reminded me of something that happened in an acting class recently, and reminded me of how important the no rule is. Because this class is about developing characters in solo show. And it's an area, because I particularly chose this other solo show actress, because she's brilliant at doing multiple characters, and because I could see from having watched her that she was very considerate of other people's no's and yeses, to stay on topic, and particularly if she's healed a lot of trauma by doing her own solo show, and that's what it's about. It's about her trauma. And she is very considerate when you're about trauma feelings that might, extreme pendulum swings, let's use our language, that might overwhelm you. And she'll always say, you know, if you want to not do an exercise or anything I suggest, you know, you feel a bit vulnerable. So she does a version of our no rule, but here's where it broke down, and it was quite difficult for me, because my area of difficulty that comes up as resistance inside me is around kind of inhabiting my body. And yet that's what I went to her class for. I want to inhabit my body, and because being 40 people, not me, but some people are 40 people in their own show, but being like, you know, 20 characters, let's say, you have to show it in the body, not just in the voice. And that was is such a hard part of the show for me. So sorry if I'm giving too much detail, but that's the way it's coming out. And so for me, the whole 4 classes I've had so far have been like coming up against my worst resistance and trusting her, and so trying to go with her exercises. And I had some wonderful experiences in these few short weeks by going with the exercise. And then last time we met, and everything's okay, I wrote to her in a lot of detail about how it was really difficult for me, and she's going to respect her version of our no rule going forward. But I explained, anyway, let's not bother with the details. She just gave me an exercise to do, and it was really dissonant for me. It didn't work. It was a bit using imagination and not so much going into the body. And she said, she thought what to do, and she said, let's push through your resistance. And it was, Cynthia, it was that really bad day when I phoned you for help, because the astrological thing was really affecting me, right? But this was before I needed to phone you for help. And I was really uncomfortable inside. I was really at war inside, and I was trying to be a good girl, and I was trying to do what she said, and I was agitated because it really wasn't working for me, and she wasn't listening till it really wasn't working for me. So the no rule makes it really safe, right? She's a different person from me. She understands how to apply the no rule if it looks like deep feelings are getting close that might tip you into a compulsive pendulum swing. And, you know, I wrote to her, I said, I always go for the change. I go against my own resistance over and over again in this area because I want to heal about it. But when I say it's really not working for me, I really need you to listen. So that's about it. Just as we were reading the Credo, I thought, oh, wow, yeah, that really happened to me. And, you know, you read it every week and it can sound very familiar and, you know, a bit like the way 12-step rules can sound, or, you know, I never find our Credo boring, but I sometimes admit to going late to 12-step meetings. But there's a tremendous power in that insistence that you, in our work, you're holding the strings. If you're going to trust the practitioner, if you're going to be prepared to try uncomfortable things, you have to be in charge of, and in Pellin work you are, in charge of, as it says in the Credo, the pace and depth of the working. And we can say that, can read it out every week. Maybe we don't really see it happening in practice because this is a discussion forum. You would more if you were doing the other half of Pellin. If you come on the training course, you see the other half of Pellin that's going into depth in our inner selves. And then that may come up a bit more. So it's really good to know that it's really lived. It's really lived in Pellin that that you are ultimately in charge of your own work, and the practitioner is wants to keep you safe and wants to gently push you as well, but you have the last say. And if I may invite Nicky to add anything to that, because she's been such a wonderful Pellin practitioner for so long. Do you want to add anything, Nicky, from your experience, personal or as a therapist?
No, can't think of anything I want to add. I just sort of wanted to reiterate or say the bit I was struck by in what you said,
right,
which was about her. Wait a minute, her saying, you saying to her, "No, look." When I was struck by you being able in that moment to be able to articulate, look, this is what I do. I do try and push myself, but when I say, no, this really isn't working for me, I need you to hear me, and that's something in, it seems like to her, she did hear you, but you had to really push it, to draw the clarity yourself. And hopefully that it doesn't happen like that in Pellin. And then just to give another example from a workshop I went to a couple of years ago, somebody doing a different sort of practice that was really exciting and different for me, but who I knew had originally done Pellin training. So I had gone to him to do this thing knowing or assuming he will still know the no rule. And he didn't. He'd bloody forgotten it. And it messed up the entire work for me right at the bit. I mean, I guess because I went with the wrong expectation, I just assumed and took for granted, well, I will start with saying the work that I want to do. And then the him not hearing my no took the form of he brought his own agenda about the work he thought I should do. And he hadn't told me that. And so I'm trying to bring the work I want to do, and I'm trying to push that in the same way as you did with your person about Mary about, no, I really want you to hear me. And I just reiterated the subject I wanted. And basically, it became for me, then I've got a practitioner coming from I'm right-itis. That's an absolute killer for me. I mean, it turned into very useful work after me journaling on it for 6 months, but that's not what I went to him for, right?
No.
I went to just be given the work, but anyhow, never mind. I turned it into something really, really beneficial. But yeah, just to reiterate the value, it's just priceless to be able to easily go, oh, okay. Or the number of times, I guess, over the years that I, as a practitioner, especially more years ago, as a Pellin practitioner, you're free to suggest, well, is it this that's going on, or is that? What is, you might have an idea, a bit of inspiration, and go, oh, well, is it that? And the number of times years ago that clients used to say, no, it's not that, but come to think of it, and then they'd say something that I would think of as sort of second cousin to the thing that I'd said. So I wasn't completely right, but I had helped them to go, oh no, but come to think of it, it's this. So something about that, it came with the ease with which, because I'd been well trained in just take the no, it enabled them to easily, they weren't having to bother, be caught up in a fight with their practitioner. They could move on to finding for themselves what the thing was they were trying to get at.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you. That's really valuable, and it's a good example for those of you who were here when last open forum I talked about, in relation to the pendulum, I talked about ignore the content and focus on the process, and Nicky described how she ignored the content and focused on the process by making any hitch. Reinterpret this, reword this if you want, Nicky, but I just heard it in what you just said. You know, you went for one thing and the guy messed it up, the practitioner messed it up, and you had to journal for a really long time to undo that kind of extra bit of damage, if that's the right word, and then something really useful came out of it. So that's
because if I can add a bit,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. If I can add a bit, it's because it meant that he was precisely hitting on my precise core bit of damage of an I'm right-itis dad. So if I hadn't known how to work on myself, that would have really messed me up. But fortunately I do, and it turned, it was able to be more beneficial than I could possibly have imagined, but about a completely different issue from what I was paying him for.
Yeah.
I never did get the thing I went there for, but I got this other thing.
So does anybody want to come in with any examples, either as a client or as a practitioner, around the observation or non-observation of a no rule in or out of Pellin? Yeah, go ahead, Tamara.
Yeah. This Monday, I really, it's strange that I ran into really like a reenactment of the issue that had come up, which was that I didn't feel that I could say no to my stepbrothers who are in their 30s, and this is around my ex-stepfather who's dying, and a lot of family ugliness and politics, and feeling very pushed to work the agenda and the schedule that's being laid out for me to show up, but without in any way, any involvement with the family, or I'm just sort of like adjunct if they need me to fill in if they're gone or whatever. But it's there's been a lot of misogyny, frankly, and not recognizing my place in the relationship with my, this is the same man who was my father. I'm twice their age, but I'm losing him, but I'm not able to share loving him or the grief of losing him with his sons. And I'm feeling very scared and guilty and pretty fragile about really wanting to say no to continuing to see my stepfather under conditions that feel really inauthentic and send me flying into days and days of really bad stuff. So I was working with a therapist who does system-centered therapy, And I would expect, you know, there have been these rules about safety and checking in with the structure of, I mean, the structure of how the therapy is run in that hour and a half is most of the focus of every therapy session. But he's clearly very excited about a new technique that he's learned called flash technique, which is when you go for the deep, I guess we would call it deep facing in Pellin.
Sounds like it, yeah.
And
well, it's probably a bit different, but anyway, go ahead.
Yes, it's a bit right, but it's like the old timey Reichian. I actually know that that's his train. You know, the going for. I was feeling scared, and I'm pretty fragile, and doing some good work around just trying to honor that and come from that place. And he dug in for me to identify that if I was depressed, it was repressed anger. And for me to go into my body, find where that anger was. He added disgust to that, disgust and anger, and to not just talk about it, but to really, whatever came out from that place in my body. And it wasn't, it was so disastrous. I've been working on communication and family stuff in repairing relationship with my adult family, and specifically with my mother. And she's there, and we were left with me swinging wildly with a pendulum. She was triggered, and there was a horrible replay of conflict and fighting, and we didn't have a therapist there to help. And it was incredibly destructive. And it felt so clear to me that it just was the therapist not listening to my no's. I was saying no with my mouth. I was saying the words. And if you could read faces, you could see that this was, it's experienced as violent by me. And I think it may have really done some damage, and I can work it meaningfully over time, but I really have questions about whether or not I want to continue to work with him. But I've decided I'm going to communicate with him about what happened. But anyway, there you have it. That's what happened for me in the last week. So it's interesting that you brought up this.
Well, you know, he really needs to know about the pendulum, right? You know, is gone on a pendulum swing of enthusiasm, and I'm rightist, like Nicky was saying, because, you know, if you know it, even a little bit about the pendulum, you would in no way assume that depression was repressed anger, because as a Pellin practitioner, you'd be looking for, I don't know if you've seen this part of the way of using the pendulum yet, but if someone's in a depression, I don't know how you work, Nicky, but I work with looking for what was a possible preceding high. So, you know, because of that, it really works. You see it over time. If you go up, you come down. If you go up, you come down. Especially if you don't easily visit the calm and around the calm area. And so that's awful, I'm rightitis, as well as awful ignoring of the no.
Yeah, I think
I'm really sorry that happened.
Thank you. It was a power or authority over, instead of his using his authority to keep us safe.
Yeah. Anyone else want to come in? Maybe, you know, Nicky, did you have anything to say about what Tamara said, or anyone else want to come in with any thoughts?
Hi. Yeah, that's awful. That's courageous of you, Tamara, if you're going to go back. I mean, good good for you to go back rather than, you know, just walk away. But I just, fingers crossed for you that he is, you know, will hear you now, will hear, you know, because, okay, as therapists, we make mistakes sometimes.
Yes.
So he made a mistake. So as long as he can hear that he made a mistake, and, you know, then that can turn into a beneficial thing in that way, at least. But yeah, exactly. He was excited about his new little tool that he'd discovered and going to push on regardless.
And I do think one of the things to look out for when you know about the life forces is this person coming from their caring life force? Because he wasn't. He was coming from his performance life force. He wanted to have control. That's performance life force. He wanted to push you in a certain direction. He wanted the excitement of the creativity that he was finding in the thing. And in a way, I don't know if this is true, but I'm thinking that with couples work and with family work, it's hard to be in that quieter place of letting things on. Well, Nicky, you've done more than me, so you'll be able to speak to me after I've said this, but my fantasy is, let me keep it a fantasy, as I've only done a bit of couple work and no full family work. My fantasy is that you need a little bit of performance life force, like you do in teaching, because you have to hold the whole situation. And then obviously once your performance life force is activated and in the situation, it can get out of hand. So have you got a comment about that? Okay.
That's interesting. I'd not really thought before about performance life force in relation to couple work, because the Pellin way of doing that is you sort of let them choose who goes first, but it's about getting each of them, you know, person A says whatever they want to say about the situation, and then person B says whatever they want to say as if they're going first, so they're not responding. And then you might bring in, now both of you write it down, and that's about the pendulum, that's about slowing it all down. And that can be really amusing to watch sometimes, because the one who's desperate to answer back to what the other one said will be writing furiously. And the one who doesn't want to listen to the other one will just indifferently jot a couple of things down. And they don't know that the whole point is, even though I'll say it, this is to slow you down, but they're not picking that up at all because they're involved in the process and their stuff. And then it's start again, but with person B responding now to what person A said the first time, and then person A responds to what B said the first time. So it's all about slow it down. So I hadn't thought about it. I'll have to give it a bit of thought about performance. I guess it's a bit more tense, because it's a bit more out of control, or it can be. You don't know what's going to happen. With one person, it's a lot easier to make one person pay attention to you saying, whoa, you know, but if you've got two of them. So I guess, maybe you've got to be sort of a bit more ready with a bit of performance to be able to jump in. But a lot of it's about trying to sit back and get them to do the work whilst you're stopping them doing their usual routine of interrupting each other. And it's a bit like two-chair work, because in two-chair work, I always say to people, you know, both parts in two-chair work never normally get to finish the whole train of thought through, because the other part of you is jumping in. So then the same is true in couples therapy. So anyway, I don't know if that's applicable to what you and your mum was doing with this therapist. Maybe you were doing some other thing altogether.
Well, I think most people don't work with slowing things down, Nicky, and so the performance life force, I wasn't trained in Pellin couples work, so that's interesting training for me. But in the couples work I tried to do when I was, in doing my training in for my license. The performance life force comes in because you're trying to stop these two people fighting, you know.
Right.
And so it would have been useful if I'd had that knowledge about Pellin work, but I didn't happen to.
Yeah.
I watched the documentary on David Pellin, and I had no idea, you know, but I didn't even have a picture in my head. But you know, he has a huge amount of performance life for, I mean, you know, yeah, he had tremendous command and charisma, and
yeah. I'm glad you raised that, Tamara, because I've been wanting to say somewhere for quite some time. There's one part of the film that I wanted to have a disclaimer about in terms of current Pellin practice, because there's that, Nicky might know which bit I'm going to say, but there's that pendulum exercise where you deliberately try to trigger somebody's pendulum by being unpleasant to them. Well, that's clearly nothing to do with our safety rules. And, you know, I almost wonder sometimes, Nicky, about having a little note underneath it, because it disturbs me so much. You know, if people happen to see that early on, they think it was part of what we do, and it so isn't part of what we do. So for those of you who haven't seen it, you know, there's two people sitting opposite each other, and they're hurling insults at each other, including I forget the word for it, but you know, it could be racist, or it could be anti-Semitic, or you know, it could be very personal and stereotype things. And it because a lot of David's training, not as a clinician, but when he did exercises with people, it was very much about them getting very strong control of the tool. Like when he's talking, you mentioned it, I think, in an email to me tomorrow, when he's talking to the woman that wanted to be a model, he's so, you know, he snaps his fingers to say, get that instant pendulum control. It's a little bit misogynistic in that, I think, in the way he's talking to her. Of his time, you know.
Time.
But yeah, there's some things that are a little difficult to watch from where we are now.
But there's also trying to keep them out of prison. So, you know, no recidivism, and so to not be easy bait for their own safety, you know, to practice in a safe place and know what it is to not get thrown back in the
or go back onto drugs, because that was the other big thing. It's probably why some of them have been in prison. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's I can see that in that context. So what about the people that haven't said anything? Do you want to come in on a different topic or on anything that we've said about?
Hi, Elizabeth here.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Well, I was thinking about practitioners and listening to the now, and I have a conventional therapist, and I've worked with her for years, and she's not an especially brilliant practitioner, but our working relationship works because of a couple Pellin flavored things she does. And one of them is hearing and respecting my nose. And one of them, oh dear, I'm sorry, the thought is slipping a little bit, so
take your time, there's no hurry.
Is really cheerleading my health and strength. And those two things alone are very much worth continuing to work with her, even though a lot of the tools I have learned to get well have come from outside that therapeutic relationship, and she hasn't been responsible for those. I'm thinking of an example where I got misdiagnosed, not by her, but by a psychologist. And that diagnosis is still on my record. And she knew I considered it a misdiagnosis. And towards the end of a session, she brought up looking at that diagnosis again, because she'd been reading up on it. And, you know, I gave her a pretty strong and immediate, not just no, but a little bit of how dare you, because she knew the intensity of my feelings on that diagnosis, and she knew that it wasn't a good idea to bring it up close to the end of a session where, you know, there wasn't time to deal with the fallout, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And as soon as I started to give that no, she went into full listening mode and admitted that she had screwed up, and her ability to do that is why she's still my therapist. And that's the thought I've been having.
Yeah, that's a great example. Thank you.
It's funny or interesting rather, that the respect my no thing, it's not always like a no, it's a hear who I say I am. But it's still like, yeah, that's a no. I'm not who you say I am. But it doesn't necessarily come in the form of a no. That's what maybe that was a bit earlier in what you were saying just there, because at the end you were saying to her no. But yeah, a no can come in numerous forms, can't it? It basically means hear who I am, hear what I say, hear me, respect my wishes, respect my boundaries, believe me.
And that's much harder for people to even think and say in a normal power-weighted therapy situation. Like a lot of people in Elizabeth's situation wouldn't have stood up for themselves, because you know, in Pellin, you're taught where our humanity is equal, and the therapist may have skills, or the trainer of tools may have skills, but you're the center, you're the worker. You're the worker that gets to say, this is fitting with what I feel about myself, or this is new, something I want to think about, or no, this doesn't feel right at all. Listen to me saying it doesn't feel right. And in Pellin, you can be confident if somebody's a well-trained practitioner inside Pellin or trainer, that they're going to hear even a hint of it. Whereas in a top-down power situation, that diagnosis gives you, that medicalization gives you, listen to the doctor knows best, or the psychologist knows best, and the therapist acting on the psychologist's diagnosis knows best. And immediately you're at a disadvantageous position in terms of, it's like you're really starting from one step down. Even with well-intentioned therapists, you're not starting from the Martin Buber I, thou line, which is, each of us being human beings and having an essential equality as human beings. And if you're a, I mean, this is my part of the truth line. So I'm talking from a passion. You know, I'm well aware how different my life would have been if I'd accepted diagnoses instead of refusing diagnoses. You know, I'd have a paper trail a mile thick, and they'd, you know, a diagnosis so big I might as well have it branded on my forehead. I prefer to give it to myself and say, you know, I could have been called this, but I say I'm an extreme pendulum swinger, and here how it's got well, you know. So I take the power for myself, and some of you know this and some of you might not, but even when I was training, even when I had no power and I was just a counselor in a mental health center, and I didn't have even a BA in psychology, let alone my MA, I stood up in front of the staff with my little group of people I trained, and we taught the pendulum, and I was transparent about how I hadn't been well and I was getting better with this tool. And you know, I put myself out there to be chopped down as someone who, if somebody didn't like me losing my temper or something, which happens now and again, oh, that's because of her diagnosis. You know, that's because really she's bipolar. So I'm sorry, that was a bit of a digression, but I guess that I'm just saying where my passion comes from about having respect and equality within the therapeutic relationship. Rather than, you know, not even being able to think no, let alone say it, because the other party holds so much power.
And the thing is, whether or not one has the choice to reject the medical model of mental health depends hugely on whether one is seeking services for a disability, because the whole reason I saw that psychologist was because I was working with vocational rehabilitation and they wanted to see if anything else was getting in the way of me finding work. And if I'd said no to the evaluation, that would have limited my options for services. And so, you know, I was plugged into this model because of my need for services. And I have a lot of feelings about how people with disabilities are put in those power down positions without much choice at all in the matter. I have a lot of feelings on that.
Yeah. And what I thought you were going to say about people that don't get plugged into the medical model can have economic implications as well. I mean, you know, the sort of, it's a bit like in alternate medicine. I have good insurance coverage that I don't pay that much for now I'm past Medicare age. I don't use my doctor, I don't go to hospital, and I put hundreds of dollars into healthy alternate medicine that I'm fortunate enough to some of the time have the resources to do. But same with therapy. You know, people can't, you know, can't avail of, can't necessarily avoid choices, places where they're going to get diagnosed if they want to get help, because they can't necessarily pay out of pocket sorts of prices.
And I'm struck
very
by
much a thing.
Sorry, go on.
Sorry. I was just going to say that my choice of mental health care is very much limited by what the Oregon Health Plan will pay for.
Yeah.
And I was struck by your phrase that you used, you know, the need for service. So you had a need for services. And that's so totally puts you in the opposite position to, sorry, the thing that always comes into my mind as, to respect somebody's no, because from my mind, the simplicity of, like, why would the medical model not do that? Don't you know the phrase, the customer is always right? I just think the customer is always right. So the client's saying they want this, they don't want that, this or that, whatever it is. They're the customer's right. And who am I to sit back and go, oh no, I think I know better. I might think you might be wrong about that and keep it secret. It's like, no, I don't know enough yet where you're coming from. Explain to me more about where you're coming from to say that you've got this opposite view to one that I might have until I understand it, because the customer is always right. But it's so different, isn't it? Having a need for services. So the service is here, and it's like you just have to walk in and take the service they give you. It's like it means you don't have rights suddenly to go, hang on, your service isn't good enough, actually. I'm coming in here and I do have a need for services, but I'm the customer. So please.
I'm not the customer is the problem.
Exactly. The
U.S. government is the customer.
Yeah.
And that's troublesome.
Elizabeth, do you mean because clarify that for me, the US government is the customer? Because they're paying for the service, or?
Because they're paying for the service, and because it's their dollar, they have a lot of decision-making power. And, as an OHP member, I have certain rights, but it's not the same as a private payer.
Yeah.
It really just isn't.
Is Oregon Health Plan like Medicaid in other states?
Yes.
But the point is they're deciding what they choose to provide and like what the poor little recipient of services needs. They're deciding, aren't they? And that's why you're not the customer.
And we do have a patient bill of rights for that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But yes, that's very much the situation, and it's easy to get pretty pessimistic about it if you're not careful.
Stacey or Cynthia want to come in with anything?
I'm seeing a new therapist today at UNLV, University of Nevada, Las Vegas.
Right.
She's a student, and we're meeting for the first time today at 5, so I'm excited about that. And we'll have to get to know each other and maybe lay some ground rules about the no rule. Because I do have trauma, and I want to explore it, but I want to be safe too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good thing to ask her about how, especially with someone training, it's challenging for the people in training.
Right, I'm sure it is, because she's just a student and I'm so complicated. Yeah, they are more open because they're students and they want to learn and try new things. And I think they're less judgmental than jaded practitioners who are in the system.
Yeah, you can strike lucky anyway. I hope you do. Wish you lots of luck with that at 5 o'clock.
Thanks.
Cynthia, are you having anything you want to share?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't have a lot of experience. I'm not a therapist. I did teach a long time ago in special ed, but that was very different. But one of the things, and even last week when we were talking, last meeting, and I was talking about a lot of things, and what came to mind was more the medical model that's going on. And I remember You know, my spouse came in with, because she works in mental health, not as a therapist, but as a peer supporter. But she came back and she went to some training about some medical model, and I saw her flyers, and this was sort of this new concept, patient-centered medicine. And I remember reading it, and I'm like, you know, basically the idea is that you get input from the patients and you explain and you work together and you talk. And I read it, I'm like, isn't that what they were been supposed to be doing all along? Is this some new thing? And I said, no wonder I get so mad at the doctors, because I'm coming in thinking that this is what we're supposed to be doing, and this is some new exciting concept. Okay. And it's very different because, you know, I have, you know, now I'm an astrologer, but my other profession was a lawyer, and it's a much different concept. As a lawyer, I mean, even if the person's not paying you, even if you're pro bono or whatever, the ethics is that you're sort of the mouthpiece for the client. You explain what's supposed to do, and as long as what they're telling you to do is not either against the law, explicitly against the law, you can go up against the law without breaking it, and against the law, or really against your morals, in which case, in those cases, even then, if the client insists and you won't do it and you can't do it, you have to withdraw from the case. It's not a matter of you can tell the client not to go. I mean, you know, I would spend time talking to clients and say, you know, this isn't necessary. You could try to convince them not to do what they're going to do, especially if you know they're going to lose, or it's going to harm somebody, or if it's, you know, or it's going to cost them a lot of money. And, you know, like when they get into I was a divorce lawyer, personal property battles. But if they insisted I had to do it and or withdraw from the case, you know, so this is how I'm going from that model. And I guess it's more in the material life force. I mean, there's a lot of performance life force in terms of doing what they want, but, you know, it's a very, you know, okay, what do you want me to do, and figure out how to do it, and if I can do it, and what the consequences are if I do it, and explain those. You know, it's just a whole different thing. And I sort of bring that, and there are some astrologers who work more as therapists or counselors, but I think I tend to bring more of my lawyer training into it. Okay, it's like, what's the problem, what's going on, what are the planets saying, this is what I suggest. Do you want me to do something else? And if the client says no, you know, or okay, and yeah, you know, I assume clients, I don't necessarily always follow up unless they contact me back. They could do it, they could take my advice, they could throw it out, or have to, or, you know, actually both as a lawyer and as an astrologer, you know, they might do something I haven't said and something completely off. Oh, I did how you advise, and I did this and this. Okay. Not, but okay, when, you know, but there's this sort of, it's a whole different model. And listening to all this talk is like, well, no wonder I've butted heads with doctors and therapists, because I'm coming from a model that I just assumed that that's how they were working. And even like when Elizabeth was talking about the government paying, when I was a lawyer in the ethics, they were very clear. It doesn't matter who's paying you, you represent the client, no matter who's paying you. I mean, that's, you know, and you sometimes have to explain that to the person who's paying. It's like, yes, even though you're paying, I take orders from the client. That's just the way it is. So it's, you know, so yeah, this, I'm sorry I'm going on, but all of this that people are talking about is like, oh, really? Oh, gosh. Well, no wonder I would get mad at people. I'm coming from a whole different ball game. So, so that's all I had to say.
I think that's really interesting. What that made me think about was I don't know when those rules were put in place and what was going on in society at the time, but that idea is very much in service. As the lawyer, you're in service to the client, right? And I think the medical profession and the medical model of psychotherapy are unfortunately pretty hierarchical, may I say, patriarchal. And I think the idea of in service to something is really important, because I think it leads to being collaborative. If you're if you're there in your function as a therapist or a doctor or something else to give your best to that person, then I think that it leads to a more collaborative attitude than if, well, I'm the doctor, stroke psychologist, stroke whatever else, teacher maybe, and so therefore I'm the one with the knowledge and skills, and I know best, and you do what I say. And that's very, very different power structure. And it's very, I mean, it's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that about lawyers, even though I knew it. That's what, thank you for that contribution.
Yeah, that gives me a thought about as a client within the system where you're the recipient of services, what it means is, of course, as usual, you've got that much more difficult job to do, like the more mentally difficult, ironically, job to do of what would ideally be the case is keep bearing in mind what is correct, what in the legal world, because that would give a lot of, it's like, well, that's how lawyers operate, so I am correct, you know, but you can't, you just have to have the strength to know that in yourself, to keep pushing on saying, no, you're wrong about what your feedback you're giving me, or, you know, no inside your head. But of course, if you're any kind of mental health world patient, as they call it, you can't be open about that, because then they'll use that to go, see, you're mad.
Yeah, that proves my diagnosis is true.
Exactly. So, terrible. So you've got this, yeah, it's that saying, isn't it? What doesn't kill you makes you strong.
Nicky, it might be time for you to ring off and
yes, I will call back just in a minute. Okay, yeah. Thanks.
Have you had any further thoughts, Tamara? I haven't said anything for a while. Sorry, that's rather putting you on the spot, but it's an invitation, not a command.
No. I was so proud of myself for not saying anything for a while. Thank you for pointing it out. I'll take that as a compliment. Well, I was actually thinking, I was reflecting on medical diagnoses for medical conditions as well. And I'd forgotten that I got real scared about getting put on disability for migraine condition that was totally debilitating. And, you know, I'd gone through neurology and they were gonna, I mean, eventually there was nothing to do but surgery. And I walked away from this group because I felt like I saw myself in the future with the disability diagnosis, and everybody was talking about themselves like they were nothing but a migraine. And I was really excited to find people that I could share, you know, this really weird life that I had had with other people and be in the company of others. But I ran when the head of the group, the doctor, was his new program, actually got really angry at me that I wasn't pursuing the disability, and that I had left the group, and he, you know, was calling me, and he needed to have a certain number of people in his new program, I realized later. But it was a choice that I made to listened to my gut. I wasn't sure what that was about, but I just felt like I had to run. And I had a doctor, a medical doctor who I really liked, who's in the system, and just told me to describe my symptoms and avoid. It was kind of like, what diagnoses to avoid, but chronic fatigue, he said, don't ever bring that up. Say you feel tired, describe your symptoms, but don't get labeled with chronic fatigue, which was another medical. It was a clusterfuck of quite a few years there, and trying to do the fancy footwork of around the diagnosis and not falling into identification with being identified as a thing.
The label rather than the person.
A number assignation. What scared me was I've heard it so often, and as a clinician myself, I don't do the eating, disordered eating. You will always, have an eating disorder. Major depression, you will always have major depression. The migraine, the chronic migraine I had, you will always have chronic migraine. And sort of it's not been true for me. I've gone through different really intense experiences, and then it's been in the past, not up ahead of me. So I think it's real scary. The prognosis thing that comes with the diagnosis is also can feel really damning.
Yeah.
Of course, that's them not taking responsibility for, we don't have the skills
Yes.
or the know-how to to heal and recover people from things. It's not, we're trained a different way. It's not what we do, and we don't even realize that, of course, there are solutions. We just haven't got them.
Right.
We just believe, oh, well, if we who are the bigwigs can't fix you, obviously it's unfixable.
And you can't fix you, and you can't be fixed.
Go ahead, Cynthia.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Nikki. Sorry, you can't see Cynthia's hand going up. You finish.
Oh, sorry.
No,
I'll just say a bit more. So, and of course they also go, oh, well, anything holistic, which they call alternative, like that's the subsidiary extra. It's like, no, that should be the thing that comes first, really. Anything holistic is just, it's very convenient, isn't it? That's just placebo. And then they say, well, placebo works anyway. Well, let me go and do the thing that you think is a flipping placebo then. And hey, watch me get well. And then they say, and I don't know where I know this from, a bit more about medical conditions. I guess it must be from clients. That's where I know anything from, really. And then they say, oh yeah, I know some of these things, they just clear up by themselves. It's a mystery to us. It's like the patient sitting there knowing, I know how, because I did this and this holistic thing, And anyway, I'll stop there.
Yes.
So, Cynthia, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add in something that when my spouse was, because she's been on a lot of meds, she's got a lot of physical issues, and she was having a hard time finding one. And on the thing, they actually said she failed these medications. And she's like, wait a minute, I didn't fail the medications. The medications failed me.
Wow.
Wow, I never heard that before. That's amazing.
Wow. I met somebody recently who the medics had diagnosed with fibromyalgia, which they know nothing about, and they think is one of those mysterious made-up things anyway. And this place where we were, there was somebody who's I can't remember the word for it. Oh, shamanic healer. And apparently this woman just sort of placed her hands over her body. She felt all these hot places, places go really hot. The practitioner said, you've got that. You've also got what two other things? I've forgotten the names for them at the moment. That thing that teenagers tend to
mono
get.
something.
Sorry?
The mono something.
No. Anyway, can't remember now. Two hardcore things, and then took a blood test, and when the blood test came back, sure enough, she had those two things. So the medics hadn't picked it up, and a shamanic healer had diagnosed her just by placing hands over. I have no idea how that works. And now, now she's going to go mega holistic to heal it, to heal all of that.
Yeah.
And once, years ago, I had medical conditions, and I remember, to go to the doctor a couple of times, and I'd come away feeling really confused and messed up in my head and just horrible. And the second or third time it happened, I came away feeling like that. I figured out that it's because, so I was raised with the medical model as if that's the norm. But since then, I've learnt about and tried to embrace the holistic model on everything. But of course, that's just not what's in me. It's not what I grew up with. And it's sort of book learning that I've tried to stick in on top. And what I worked out then was, what I need is you have to decide ultimately which one is going to come front for you and which one you're going to just use as the backup thing. And I hadn't worked out yet that, no, I want the holistic model to come first, and I'm going to bring that to them, but keep quiet about it, and just use them to back that up. And then, ever since then, I've been able to deal with doctors without them messing my head up, because I just think, okay, you think that, do you? Oh, that's interesting. Well, I'll go away and see what more sensible people think.
Yeah, that's a really really astute. Yeah, that's definitely what I've done. I decided a long time ago, but about emotional issues, but then about physical things. Yeah, holistic first. It does help you. It helps you say no to doctors, when they want to give me stuff. I just say, well, I'm just gonna. That's a part of how I've never taken medicine for depression, because my doctor would say, do you want to consider it? And I'd say, no, no thanks. I'm just gonna keep with the way I'm doing it, and so it was never pressed on me.
I want to put in a word on the other side, which is how confusing and it was disempowered. I remember, learning, it's like Helen Keller, it has a name, when I learned that there was a thing, it was depression. It was, look, it's in a book. Look, here's the criteria. And maybe we can say that you have a problem with depression, for example, or that this thing that you've been holding, close to, tight to yourself, that it's like you share with other people. When I was bulimic, when I was in my early whatevers, and the relief of normalizing something, and then the gift, when there was nothing that I could take, and then there was the option of using Paxil at that time, you know, like an SSRI that allowed me to get more into the, is it called the official strand? You know, I mean, I was able to get to a place professionally, thanks to, you know, pursuing active, you know, paying for, you know, the therapy and using the meds to fill in the potholes and, you know, keep me in the game. So I hit a wall with the Western medical, but it served me well to get me to a place that felt clean, and there was reason, there was a book, there was I didn't have to fall in the hands of individual practitioners that didn't come together, and I felt like I was in relationships with people asking for help, but that there wasn't a school of thought about what, you know, I felt unsafe not having it's a big deal when the people in white coats acknowledge that there is such a thing as Lyme disease, you know, and it's like before that happens, you're marginalized. So there's, I remember a time when it wasn't, it was relief and empowering, and I got help, and I was really grateful for it. And then it just blew up in my face when I felt like I had crossed the line from customer to patient. I could feel it. It was like I was an invalid, and I was invalidation, and then it was like, oh, I'm fucked. And it was just like, you know, and trying to get myself back in my seat again as, you know, you're here working for me, but it's hard because I had a file, you know.
Well, that's the excuse I've heard, or the justification I've heard for the it's called the DSM-5 now, I think, you know, the big fat dictionary of all the diagnoses for mental health. And they say, well, you know, we have to have a language, we have to have a way we can talk about things. And evaluating in terms of hurt and purpose, yes, I've heard people who are bipolar, and I was working with in the mental health center, and they say it was such a relief to me when I got my diagnosis because it made sense of my life. Yeah. So in what I'm saying about my personal choice never to take medication because of meeting contribution training, I'm not, you know, both my mother and my brother had the support of pills for depression at times, and really, really helped them. So I'm not meaning to, I can sound, because I get passionate about my own journey, I can sound completely anti-medication, and I'm not completely anti-medication, but it's a choice I didn't want to make for myself. But if you evaluate in terms of hurt and purpose, in individual lives, when the medication works, because it only works, I think, some frightening figure like 30% of the time for people with really deep depressions, then yeah, that's a lot of good on the positive side of hurt. But I think that when people won't look at the power dynamics, you know, people in the medical or psychological professions won't look at the power dynamics, and then there's a lot of hurt caused because of thinking of people in terms of their labels, like you were just describing, Tamara. And the person themselves, you know, the label that maybe comes as a relief to understand, make sense of their symptoms, then becomes this brand, this box that they're in. forever. And when I was working at DD Mental Health Centre, one person whose symptoms made complete sense to me in terms of what he told me about his life, he would say, he went and he got a diagnosis. You know, he was one of the people that kept changing his diagnosis. And he came back and he was terribly distraught. And he said, oh, they diagnosed me with schizoaffective disorder. And that means, and the psychiatrist, no, not what it means. The psychiatrist said to him, you will have this for life.
Yeah.
It's like, why on earth do they give life sentences like that? You know, it's like, how can somebody recover and find the best in themselves when that's the label and the prognosis? So it's a, you know, I don't quite know how we strayed so deeply into, probably through me, into the other way of doing things. Go ahead, Nicky.
It's all about saying no, isn't it? This is all about the power that it gives you to be able to say no. Like, thank you very much. I will take that label, that name of a, you know, don't want to say gather of symptoms, you know, that name, because that means I can read books about it and inform myself, and I am not alone. And this is not some weird thing. Loads of people act out in this same way because of shit that's gone on for them. And look at all these things we've got. So the ability to use all that to empower yourself, and then I guess that threatens the powers that be, doesn't it? And then they go, oh, no, we're going to use it as a label. And that's when it just totally shifts. So that's I guess then but we're back to having to have the individual strength to say, no, I keep it for myself. Me and my group of buddies who have all got this collection of symptoms about how we deal with our past. Thank you, Mr. Shrink. That's all it is. This is our business now. Bye. You know.
What I really like about the Pellin tools in relation to this is that a lot of experiences where I wondered if I fell into a particular label or not, I don't have to worry about anymore. For example, I was having things that my therapist was calling flashbacks. And, you know, am I having flashbacks? Do I have PTSD? I haven't gone through enough trauma to have PTSD. Have I? And, you know, the whole mental spin comes to Pellin. Well, everybody experiences memory links to some degree. And the tool of memory links covers everything from a completely healthy person's thoughts about Christmas to full visual and auditory flashbacks. And I feel tied into the wealth of human experience, and I have the language to use to describe what's happening to me. And what that means is that Pellin having a toolkit that the worker decides what to use and what not to use, I think it combines a lot of the best of both sides of this exact, you know, is the medical model good because it provides language? Is it bad because it's applying inescapable labels? The Pellin toolkit is incredibly agile and incredibly powerful in binding people into the community and giving them the language to work with. And that's what I think.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to say just a few minutes ago, I thought, whoops, I just remembered, you know, Peter steadfastly will not use the word depression. because of the language issue, because he will always say compulsive low, or maybe he says extreme low. And I've tended more to say depression, and in relation to myself, mania at times, because of who when I'm trying to communicate to people where that's their language. And also because it's a word that's been used in my family my whole life. So I've got, you know, it might be good for me to make a conscious effort and always say compulsive low in terms of really, because I think just, I'm going to say where I am and finish this thought, and then we'll go round. Mary and Rosarito Beach. But I think that the point I was going to finish on for me is that the language we use really infiltrates and influences the way we think. And in a way that's, I forget what I was going to talk about today, but it was something else than I picked up from the draft credo, but it was about that. It was about strength and health. That's right. I was going to talk about how fundamentally different it is to meet a Pellin practitioner, and that assumption right through every layer of a Pellin practitioner's psyche is looking at the person opposite them in terms of the strength and health they have had or will have, even if they're falling to pieces in front of their eyes. There's no assumptions. We don't go with the attraction of hurt and assume that we're just looking at a mess. And I just suddenly got this flash of how different that was, because this is the major way I've been trained. Despite having a license, my major training is in Pellin. And I thought, gosh, that's so different, you know, from the problem-saturated orientation. So, okay, Nicky, do you want to go next as the co-leader?
Yes, thank you. Hold on. Quick cough. Yeah, no, that just reminded me of a client who came to me in a. I sort of remember her husband. It felt to me like her husband sort of carried her through the door and sort of put her down there. He didn't quite do that, but she was at that time. She had, you know, really fallen apart, and he was. She told me later he was really frightened. He was going to have her sectioned. It's like, that's such madness. And I remember watching, you know, just in the space of an hour, because she was such a strong person, such a, you know, it's a strong person who, in that case, all of a lot of traumatic chickens had all come home to roost at once, you know, and it's just too much to process all at once. Suddenly realizing one parent's a complete nightmare, but the other one's dead, and it's like, what? Who can? And I just remember it was really simple. It just, because fundamentally everything. That's where I come from. That I know everything is logical, and if it doesn't look logical yet, I just haven't found the logic yet. That's all it is. And so all you have to do is go, well, find the logic, and suddenly, oh, ping! It's like, well, that's better. It's all smiles. The person knows they're going to be able to work out the logic. I guess it shows the person that everything is logical in the end. That what they're going through is logical. And
well, I think I have that idea, but I call it making sense.
Right.
It's the same sort of thing you're saying. So when something unbearable and overwhelming takes place, if you find a way to help the client see the sense of it or logic of it, to use your word, then there's a relief in them, and they touch their strength and health again, right? Is that what you're talking about?
Exactly. That's the bit that I've just seen, that I've known for a long time, that I just completely know there's logic in everything, and I just look for the logic. But I've only just seen that that's health and strength first. I've just got a particular angle on it for myself, I guess. Anyway, right. Thank you very much. I'm Nikki, and I'm still in Wimbledon, London. Thank you.
We've lost Stacey, so Cynthia, would you like to go next?
I'm Cynthia. I'm in Kankakee, Illinois. And something I was thinking about while we were talking about this, one of the tools I think that we've been touching about, aside from the community strand, but dealing with we've been talking a lot about authority and threats to authority with the doctors and stuff, and just having that thought, it makes it easier for you not to go crazy. It's like, oh, he's being obnoxious because this is a threat to authority. And then you can have a thought of how to handle it rather than, do I have to do, just sort of being able to step back. So that was just something that came to mind.
Yeah, thank you. Great point. Elizabeth?
I'm Elizabeth from Eugene, Oregon, and what Cynthia just said reminded me how grateful I am that I have the best rheumatologist in town, who is so secure in his authority that when I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, he recommended I go ahead and look on YouTube for meditations to help. Now, for a medical doctor to suggest something like that, that is a lot of security in himself.
Yeah, thank you. And Tamara, last but not least.
I'm Tamara in San Francisco, and I really thank you, Elizabeth, for talking about that. I don't know what this is about the Pellin language, but being able to articulate and hold without diminishing, but it's something really powerful about the simple language and the tools, but the ways in which you can go deep and reach for, well, I don't know, there's some magic in here. Who's the magician in this Pellin work? That's what I want to know. It really is, disguises itself as, but it's interesting to be here. So I'm very interested to see where this next year takes me. This time next year, I'd like to see if I'm out of this I'm out of this closet I'm in right now.
You are.
This is my safe place. You have no idea how fucked up I am right now. COVID has really done it for me. So, yeah, thank you very much, you guys.
I think the magic is the magic of Dave getting those tools and Peter's development of them and his way of doing it.
Yeah.
But, to go right back to the beginning of where we started, this, Peter says that thing sometimes, and safety comes first, safety is second and third. And I think that's crucial. And I haven't heard anyone else say that in our field. It's really important.
Can I add a comment? I'm struck
Please.
by the word magic. Where's the magic coming from? And it just reminded me when I was first on the training course, and the second week. Now, I had been on the program in Italy twice by then, but still, I was really struck at the time by, in the second week of the training, so we'd had 4 hours of training the previous week, Peter got us in pairs, and you just had to do 5 or 10 minutes or something of putting the person in the chair. And it was about noticing the difference in the voice, getting to talk, notice the difference in the tone of voice, and then go, now just be that voice in the other chair. And I remember, and I was thinking at the time, like, this is week 2 and we're doing this already, like straight away, fearless. And I remember putting the woman in the other chair, and the expression on her face completely changed. And I knew what that felt like because I had been the worker already on the program in Italy. So I knew, wow, she is feeling something completely different. And I literally felt like looking up my sleeves for the rabbits. I thought, I'm going to be pulling rabbits out from my sleeves in a minute. This felt like doing magic. Yeah.
Yeah, chair work's a definite part of the magic, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So I have to ask us to close now
And
because
common sense.
someone else needs this Zoom meeting space. So
right.
I won't be staying on this
Right.
week. And thank you, everyone, and look forward to seeing you on Sunday.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.